Well, hello again and welcome to another Geospatial-Next Innovators webinar. So Jim, Chris, Miles and myself are doing regular webinars on different topics within the geospatial world. Our view is a Geospatial-Next view, and we're really actually just really teeing up conversations which are not traditional conversations in the GIS world. In other words, they're not just narrowly focused in that world. We're actually taking a much bigger perspective on that, and in many ways kind of looking down on the industry and seeing where it fits in a more broader way. So today Miles couldn't make it, unfortunately, but our conversation, which is a relatively short one this week, is GIS at an inflection point? And I'm really fascinated in what both Chris and Jim had to say on this particular question. So I hope you enjoy it too.
So great. So got Jim and Chris on. Miles couldn't make our conversation today, so we'll slap them on the bottom for being too busy. That's probably a good thing. But what we're going to talk about today is GIS and the geospatial industry at an inflection point. And I'll preface this before Jim and Chris jump in, is that could be an inflection point in terms of technology. That could also be an inflection point in terms of business. I suspect it's both. But anyway, let's start, and I'll get you guys to jump in and talk. Whoever wants to start the conversation first, please feel free to jump in.
So yeah, I'll jump in first. Like you said, it's been super busy. We've all been very busy, which is actually a good sign. Things are kind of definitely picking back up. The perspective that I wanted to take based upon some of our conversation off the record here is I am not your traditional GIS person, and yet I taught myself GIS back in the mid-90s, and then I got into the GIS market because I saw lots of opportunity to automate workflows and make the life of the everyday GIS person a whole lot better. What's fascinating to fast forward 25 years and look at what's happening now is we are at an inflection point, not so much because there are a lot more GIS people or because GIS encompasses many more different technologies than it did 25 years ago. We're at an inflection point because the volume of data and the complexity of things like digital twins of the planet or of individual sites or campuses or buildings, the complexity of those is going to rapidly scale beyond the ability of human operators to really make sense of any of the kind of the innards of massive data sets or digital twins or other applications of geospatial technology. So I think for me, the inflection point that we're seeing is a move away from the classic GIS person and GIS group doing the core mapping business in the corner to a real pervasive application of geospatial intelligence across massive business systems that have real implications and which may not even be having a human in the loop making decisions about what the outcomes of human processes end up being because of all the data collection and availability that there is today. So I'm not sure if that made sense, but what I'm seeing is just us going way beyond the classic paradigm of even, forget about the desktop versus the web, which is still a debate in some parts of the GIS industry. Now we're really moving into a paradigm where it's the machine against the human, not in a combative sense, but does it even make sense anymore to have humans doing some of the GIS work that was traditionally seen as GIS? And I think we're actually moving beyond that, partly just because of data availability and quantity. So that's where I see the inflection point really happening.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I'll maybe sort of hooking onto that thought, and what I'm seeing is, I think Chris is right. Like following the data sources and what I think the definition of geospatial data is becoming much more broad. So is LiDAR geospatial data, is sensor collected IoT data, fixed and telemetry, is that GIS data, is mobile advertising data that's coming off of an SDK emitting lat long and device ID, is that GIS data? Is a camera GIS sensor on a phone or on a overlooking a highway or on a plane? And the experiences of consuming geospatial data are broadening in all kinds of ways. Is a video game a metaphor for consuming 3D geospatial data? And the ways of extracting insight out of data, to Chris's point, is a computer vision algorithm or a neural network that you can put in the loop, so to speak, and maybe even remove human operators from looking at the insights or the derivatives. That can be automated. And looking at the sort of level 5 autonomy stuff, all of that is a geospatial problem. They're out driving these highly instrumented mobile mapping vehicles, collecting 3D, very, very dense data sets that they're then training up and performing localization on the from the vehicle to figure out where it is in 3D space and what are obstructions in real time and all of that sort of stuff. Is that a geospatial problem? And I think the answer is yes on all of those, but the definition therefore is then broadening. And the architectures are changing, the architectures to support that. And I think GIS plays a central role in a lot of this, and geospatial as an outer ring around GIS in some ways plays a very central role, but it's one of many roles. All the work that Chris is doing now in terms of, automating the production of synthetic data and all of that is going to play a role. And is that part of a GIS? Probably not, but that is geospatial data that models can consume and then emit output that a GIS can make use of, for instance. But I think GIS is basically becoming a peer of many other enterprise systems, all riding in these very large data platforms, public cloud data platforms. That the challenge is really about integrating data and about following data from collection, from sensor all the way out to business value in these different ways that manifests, and having a deep sense of the geospatial problem sets and how they can be applied even in these other workflows and other enterprise systems. Chris has taken all these years of knowledge and in BIM and in GIS and in 3D data and in AI, and applying that in a very different perspective than the perspective that a GIS company might have, but it's all going to be participating in this data ecosystem. And I think if we center everything around the data rather than centering everything around the technology, I think we'll find ourselves in a broader view of what tooling is needed and what business problems can be solved. Because the challenge is really going to be integrating and synthesizing all these disparate data sources, and that's what GIS has always been good at. But now the aperture is much larger.
So then that's a good point you both make. So then where does GIS fit in that bigger whole? I mean, I see diagrams where folks have put GIS right in the middle and other systems connect into it. Is it, and our GIS has always sort of sat in, dare I say, in isolation. People call it a niche, it's in the public sector. It has certain people that are analysts that are trained to use it. It's traditionally been two-dimensional maps, So the path of GIS is what? Where do we envisage GIS being in 10 years' time, for example?
I think GIS more than anything is an integration technique, and you can call it a set of products, but I don't think of it that way necessarily. I think it's an integration technique that you can use to synthesize disparate data, and the data is much more disparate than it's ever been. And so that technique still perhaps should sit at the center in some ways, but the tooling maybe not. The tooling needs to adapt to the current realities, and I think to that point, like having one of the things we've talked about, taking a perspective on with this podcast, this series of episodes, is looking at that integration technique from a variety of perspectives. And I think having having a perspective of, putting your AI and labeling hat on, and what are the problems you're trying to solve with that part of this tool chain, or putting your visualization and physics-based gaming engine hat on, and what are the problems that you're trying to solve? How do you think about things like projections? How do you think about all these? Because I think there's a set of problems that the GIS tooling has solved, and there's sets of problems that all these adjacent technologies are solving, and how does that data still get fused and synthesized is going to be the challenge. And again, we always gravitate towards the technology, but like, what are the business problems that all of this fusion is going to solve? I think we could go deep on that. I think that the opportunities are opening up for many of the verticals to take and harmonize a lot of this, geographic data and bring them into their business workflows, and the answers that the questions that they're already asking, not to mention the questions they could be asking, but the questions that they're already asking can be enhanced by having this, call it a simulation environment, or call it a digital twin, or call it a contextual layer that you can use to help answer those questions.
Yeah, it's fascinating. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, well, and in one sense, Jim's giving me flashbacks to earlier in the GIS market. For one thing, I completely agree. Like most of my career was spent on integration problems of one type or another, whether that was literal enterprise integration of GIS and CAD with document management systems and CRM, ERP systems, that kind of stuff, or whether it's bringing together BIM and GIS data, which in some cases required convincing people that BIM data could be treated as GIS data. And to your point there, Jim, the definition of what is able to be treated as geospatial content has definitely expanded. The aperture has opened up very broadly, way beyond where it started out. The other side of it, though, is I completely agree with you that business value is paramount. One of you'll remember there used to be books that Esri published, things like The Business Value of GIS, because largely that was literally the title of one of them, right? Because what they were trying to do was illustrate use cases where geospatial technology was relevant. Interestingly, back then, often, like I was in some of the roles I was in, I was at the hinge point of competition between GIS and the CAD market. And one of my observations really early on was that it's kind of fascinating that GIS and CAD came out of the same budget, because the CRM, ERP budgets and the same customers would be 100 times the size of the GIS and CAD budget together, right? So really, the business problem that the customer was focused on, actually, they didn't see it as a intrinsically spatial problem. They used enterprise addressing to integrate lots of different customer points or points of sale together. They needed CAD information for some reason, but really they're spending money on stuff that was completely not the geospatial tech tool set or anything like that. What I would say, though, is what we are seeing now is the mere volume of data that is being collected and is potentially applicable to actual business problems has expanded so much, back to that aperture, that suddenly there is a tremendous opportunity to derive real business value across deep supply chains and broadly distributed businesses that simply didn't exist before. And I'd say some of the actual tooling to make that happen is still yet to be created. So that's, I think, where some of what you're doing comes into play, Jim, trying to puzzle piece together a variety of different tools and environments and data sets to try to make pay and business sense out of data sources that a large customer already has available, but simply doesn't know how to glue together. So, which takes you right back to the integration problem that you already addressed. So yeah, I certainly think, if anything, maybe it's an exponentially more complex integration problem that we're faced with today than 15 years ago. And that's probably causing what we see as an inflection point in how to even think about doing GIS or think about what the meaning of GIS really is. I'll tell you, and I know these are fighting words for some. I don't think that programs like the GISP program are well suited for the modern data and the complexity of the modern data environment in terms of what geospatial really is in societal and business value. I think that some of those programs are still overly focused on yesterday's tooling, and that's whether it's open source or proprietary, it doesn't matter. I think it's more they're focused on roles of people and techniques that don't really fit what is needed in the future. So we, at our company, we're actually looking at different roles that are likely to be needed in the future. We talk about the synthetic data engineer as somebody who can pull together geospatial, 3D, gaming engine technology, and still understand machine learning and AI so that they can actually design and engineer data sets to be used to train. And that's not something that is going to fall into the traditional GISP type job description.
Yeah, fascinating. We'll get a few comments on that one, but I totally agree. And I think
I used to be a GISP, just so everybody knows. I started out, I was against it. I actually did it for the first 5 years, and then I dropped it.
Well, and I think actually, I mean, this is a short conversation, so we're going to cut it short in a few minutes. But just to summarize, I think we touched on it in what we've just spoken about here. Is this conversation is less about us navel gazing around GIS and geospatial, but really talking at that higher level in terms of where it fits into the bigger whole. We're not going to talk from the inside out. We're going to talk from the outside in some ways, in many ways. And that's really giving me a goal of the topics that we discuss and then the guests that we invite on. Would you both agree with that? That's our perspective in this?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we'll cut it there. Thanks to you both. We'll post this one and we'll do another one in a couple of weeks when Miles is with us as well. So thanks to you both for this one.
Thank you guys, for sure.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on the Geospatial-Next channel. We're focused here on understanding the future of geospatial. That's both how we get to mainstream adoption of the technology and data, and how we start using blockchain and crypto to move things forward. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.